What's going on, guys? Let me tell you something right now, what you're about to hear. Nobody in the mainstream media is talking about this. Not ESPN. Not the highlight reels. Not the talking heads sitting behind their fancy desks breaking down stats like they actually know what's going on inside that locker room. This is the raw, unfiltered, behind-the-curtain truth about what it was really like to be Lexi Hull, standing inside the eye of the most powerful storm women's basketball has ever seen. Because here's the thing, bro. When Caitlin Clark walked through those doors at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, everything changed. And I mean everything. The crowds, the cameras, the pressure, the money, the narrative. All of it flipped overnight like somebody just hit a switch. But while the whole world was going crazy over Clark, and rightfully so, let's be honest, there was this other story happening in the shadows. A story about a woman who had already been fighting for her life in this league for 2 years before any of this madness even started. Lexi Hull. 6th overall pick. Stanford grad. National champion. And yet, she was out here playing scared. Playing like every single shot could be her last. Playing like one bad game meant her career was over. And now, she's finally speaking out. No filter. No PR spin. Just the truth. So you better get comfortable because this one hits different. Let's get it. Alright, let's go deeper. Because before we get to the Caitlin Clark effect, before we get to the sold-out arenas and the viral moments and the three-point rain Lexi Hull was dropping on everybody's heads, we gotta go back. Way back. To a version of Lexi Hull that most of you never saw. And honestly, that's exactly the problem. See, when the Indiana Fever drafted Lexi Hull 6th overall in 2022, everybody assumed it was going to be smooth sailing. Top 10 pick. Elite college resume. Stanford pedigree. The girl had won a national championship, been a 3-time All-Pac-12 selection, won academic awards on top of basketball awards. On paper, she was everything a franchise could want. But here's what nobody told Lexi Hull before she showed up to her first WNBA training camp. The Indiana Fever were bad, bro. Not like, oh, they're rebuilding bad. Not like, give them a season or two bad. We're talking bottom of the barrel, missing playoffs entirely, cycling through losing seasons like it was part of the culture bad. There was no safety net. No veteran leadership pulling everyone together. No winning environment to plug into and just figure things out gradually. It was sink or swim. Every single night. And for a young player still learning what her game looks like at the professional level, that environment is brutal. Like, genuinely career-altering brutal. Because when a team is losing and the front office is frustrated and roster spots feel like they could disappear any second, every possession carries weight that it just shouldn't carry for a second-year player still finding her footing. Hull was averaging below 5 points per game in those first 2 seasons. And I know what some of y'all are thinking. Okay, that's not great, but it happens to young players. Sure. But context matters here, guys. Context is everything. She was getting minutes. Real minutes. Over 20 minutes a night in year 2. The opportunity was there. The talent was there. Everyone who watched her at Stanford knew the talent was there. But something was blocking it. Something was sitting right on top of her game like a weight she couldn't shake. And that something was fear. Real, paralyzing, keeps you up at night fear. And she admitted it. Publicly. In her own words. Said that every shot felt like it carried life or death consequences. Said if she shot it, it needed to go in, or she might get benched. Might get cut. Yo. Read that back for a second. A top 10 draft pick. A national champion. Lying awake at night terrified that one missed jumper could end everything she'd worked her whole life to build. That hits different when you really sit with it. And the craziest part? Nobody was even watching closely enough to notice she was drowning. But just wait, because what happens next? Nobody saw it coming. Okay guys, buckle up. Because this is where the story starts to shift. And trust me, the shift hits like a freight train. So we've established where Lexi Hull was mentally in those first 2 years. Scared. Suffocating. Playing on fumes of confidence in an environment that was slowly grinding her down. And look, nobody's blaming the Fever organization entirely here. Rebuilding teams are tough. Losing cultures are real. But the fact remains that Lexi Hull was a gifted, intelligent, elite-level athlete who was being swallowed alive by the pressure of just trying to survive on a roster that had no margin for error. And then, April 15, 2024 happened. The WNBA draft. And with the very first pick, the number 1 overall selection, the Indiana Fever called the name that the entire sports world had been waiting to hear. Caitlin Clark. University of Iowa. Bro, I need you to understand the magnitude of that moment. Not just for women's basketball. Not just for the WNBA. But specifically, specifically, for Lexi Hull and every single player already sitting in that Indiana Fever locker room. Because when Caitlin Clark walks into your building, everything changes before she even laces up her sneakers. Let me paint you the picture of who Clark was coming in. She wasn't just a good college player. She wasn't just a highly touted prospect. She was the greatest scorer in the history of NCAA basketball, men or women. Full stop. She had broken records that had stood for decades. She had turned Big Ten women's basketball into must-watch television that was pulling bigger numbers than NBA playoff games on certain nights. NBA playoff games, guys. Iowa Hawkeyes games were sellouts. Road games were sellouts. People were buying tickets to watch the opposing team play, just to see Caitlin Clark in person. That's a level of star power that doesn't exist in women's sports. Like, historically doesn't exist. And now she was coming to Indiana. To Lexi Hull's team. To Lexi Hull's locker room. Now here's where I need you to think about this from Lexi's perspective for a second. Because the easy narrative, the lazy narrative, is to say, oh great, a superstar arrives and lifts everybody up, happy ending, roll credits. But real life doesn't work like that. Real locker rooms don't work like that. When the most hyped, most scrutinized, most talked about player in the history of your league joins your team, the dynamics get complicated fast. The cameras follow her everywhere. Every practice, every shoot-around, every post-game interview. The media wants Clark. The sponsors want Clark. The fans flooding into arenas they never bothered to visit before? They're there for Clark. So where does that leave everyone else? Where does that leave a player who was already battling confidence issues? Already fighting just to hold onto her spot? Already carrying the weight of 2 years of fear and doubt and near misses? Where does that leave Lexi Hull? That's the question nobody was asking. And the answer? It's not what you'd expect. Okay guys, this is where it gets real. Like genuinely real. Because what I'm about to break down is the part of this story that separates it from every other superstar joined struggling team narrative you've ever heard. Because most players in Lexi Hull's position, they would have crumbled. Think about it. You're already fragile mentally. You're already playing scared. You're already questioning whether you even belong at this level. And now the most famous, most watched, most talked about player in women's basketball history just walked into your locker room and took all the oxygen out of the room. The spotlight that was never really on you before? Now it's not on you at all. It's laser focused on one person. And that person ain't you. For a lot of players, and I mean a lot of players, that environment breeds resentment. It breeds insecurity. It makes the mental battle even harder because now you're not just fighting your own doubts. You're fighting the feeling of being invisible. Of being irrelevant. Of being background noise in somebody else's story. But here's where Lexi Hull did something that honestly deserves way more credit than it's getting. She paid attention. Not just to Clark as a teammate. Not just to her personality or her work ethic, though we'll get to all of that. She paid attention to what Clark was doing on the floor. She studied it. She absorbed it. She started to understand something about Caitlin Clark's game that most casual fans completely miss when they're busy going crazy over the logo threes and the behind-the-back passes. Caitlin Clark is a gravitational force, bro. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it in the most literal basketball sense possible. When Clark has the ball, when she crosses half court and the defense has to account for her from literally 30 feet away, she pulls defenders toward her like a magnet. 2 defenders. Sometimes 3. Collapsing on her. Rotating toward her. Terrified of what she's capable of from anywhere on the floor. And what does that create for everyone else? Space. Clean, beautiful, wide-open space. For someone like Lexi Hull, a player who had spent 2 years psyching herself out over contested shots in a broken offensive system on a team going nowhere, that space wasn't just helpful. It wasn't just a tactical advantage. It was liberation. Because here's what Hull actually said about it, guys, and this quote needs to sink in. She said that after Clark arrived, she knew she was going to get open shots. And she said she didn't need to worry about whether they went in or not, because she had put in the work and she would live with the outcome. Yo, you hear that shift? You feel that? That is not the same woman who was lying awake terrified that one missed shot would end her career. That is somebody who finally exhaled. Somebody who finally found the mental freedom to just play basketball. The way she always knew she could. And when Lexi Hull plays free. When the fear is gone and the court opens up and she's getting looks she can actually trust. The numbers don't lie, bro. 47.1% from three-point range in 2024. 47.1%. That's not a breakout season. That's not a hot streak. That's one of the most efficient shooting performances in the entire league. From a player that half the WNBA world had already written off. And we're just getting started on what happened next. Alright guys, let's talk about something that doesn't show up in any box score. Doesn't show up in the highlight reels. Doesn't get discussed on the pre-game shows or the post-game breakdowns. Let's talk about what actually happens inside a locker room when a generational talent arrives. Because here's the thing about Caitlin Clark that the media gets half right and half completely wrong. Yeah, she's a transcendent scorer. Yeah, her court vision is elite. Yeah, she changed the financial and cultural landscape of the WNBA basically overnight. All of that is true and documented and undeniable. But what doesn't get talked about enough, what Lexi Hull has started to open up about in ways that are genuinely moving, is who Caitlin Clark is as a person inside that building. And bro, this part matters. This part matters a lot. See, there's a version of Caitlin Clark that could have walked into Indiana and let the hype consume everything around her. It happens. We've seen it in every major sport. Superstar arrives, superstar gets coddled, superstar becomes an island, and the rest of the roster quietly resents it while pretending everything is fine for the cameras. That is not what happened in Indiana. Hull has talked about the dynamic between her and Clark with a level of warmth and specificity that you just can't fake. She's described Clark as somebody who genuinely sees her teammates. Not as role players orbiting her stardom. Not as supporting cast filling lanes so she can do her thing. But as real players with real games that deserve real respect. Clark was vocal in practice about finding Hull. She was deliberate about it. When Hull was open, Clark found her. When Hull made a big shot, Clark was the first one celebrating like it was her own bucket. That kind of affirmation, coming from the player, the one everybody in the building is watching, does something to your confidence that no coaching staff pep talk can replicate. Think about it from Hull's perspective for a second, guys. For 2 years she had been invisible. Playing on a team nobody cared about, in a league that was still fighting for mainstream attention, terrified of her own jump shot. And suddenly the most famous basketball player in women's sports history is actively looking for her on the floor and hype-ng her up when she delivers. That changes a person. That rewires something fundamental about how you see yourself as a player. And Hull wasn't the only one feeling it either. The whole energy of that Indiana Fever roster shifted. Because when Clark is locked in, when she's running the offense and pulling defenders and making everybody around her feel like they have a role and a purpose, basketball becomes fun again. Even for players who had forgotten what fun felt like. But here's where I need to pump the brakes for a second. Because this story isn't all sunshine and transformation montages. There were real challenges, real friction, real moments where the weight of everything Clark brought with her, the good and the complicated, pressed down on everybody in that locker room. And some of those moments? Hull experienced them directly. The road trips where the media circus was so overwhelming that just getting through a hotel lobby felt like running a gauntlet. The games where the crowd was there exclusively for Clark and you could feel it as a teammate, that electric energy directed at one person while you're out there grinding. The constant questions from reporters who wanted to talk about Clark and only Clark regardless of what you just contributed on the floor. How do you handle that? How do you stay grounded in your own identity as a player when you're swimming in somebody else's gravitational pull every single day? Hull found her answer. And it's honestly one of the most mature, self-aware things I've heard a professional athlete say in a long time. But to understand it fully, you need to know what happened during one specific stretch of the 2024 season that tested everything. Okay guys, this is the part of the story where everything gets flipped upside down. Because up until this point, we've been building this narrative of transformation, right? Lexi Hull arriving scared and broken. Caitlin Clark showing up and changing the entire atmosphere. Hull finding her shot, finding her confidence, finding her voice. It's a good story. The feel-good story. But real life doesn't stay feel-good for long. And in the 2024 WNBA season, there was a moment, a stretch of games, that ripped the band-aid completely off and forced Lexi Hull to confront something she thought she had already conquered. Caitlin Clark went down. Sidelined. 5 games. Gone. And suddenly, everything that had changed for Hull was put under the most intense pressure test imaginable. Because think about what that means practically. The player who had been creating all that beautiful open space? Not there. The gravitational force pulling 2 and 3 defenders away from everybody else on the floor? Gone. The offensive engine that had been liberating Hull from 2 years of fear and hesitation? Absent. And now the entire league, every defense, every coaching staff, every scout, could adjust. Could tighten up. Could put their attention back on stopping the pieces around Clark because Clark wasn't there to punish them for it. For Lexi Hull, that was the moment of truth, bro. Like genuinely the moment of truth. Because here's the question that nobody was asking out loud but everybody in that organization was feeling. Was Hull's transformation real? Was the confidence genuine? Was the 47% three-point shooting the product of a player who had genuinely leveled up? Or was it entirely dependent on the system Clark created around her? That's a brutal question. And it's the kind of question that gets inside your head fast if you let it. And Hull? She felt it. She's been honest about that. The pressure crept back in. Not at the same suffocating level as those first 2 years. She had grown too much for that. But it was there. That familiar whisper in the back of your mind asking whether you're actually good enough or whether you've just been in the right place at the right time. You guys know that feeling, right? That moment when the thing you've been leaning on disappears and suddenly you have to ask yourself, who am I without it? Athletes deal with that constantly. But most of them never talk about it publicly. Most of them perform confidence even when they're crumbling inside because showing vulnerability in a professional sports environment feels like handing your opponents a weapon. Hull talked about it anyway. And what she said about how she got through that stretch, how she pushed through the doubt and the pressure in the absence of her most important teammate, that's where this story goes from inspiring to actually legendary. Because it wasn't Clark who pulled her through it. Clark wasn't even there. It was everything Clark had already given her. See, those months of playing alongside Clark hadn't just improved Hull's numbers. They had fundamentally rewired how she thought about herself as a basketball player. Clark had shown her, through actions, through trust, through those deliberate passes finding her on the wing, that she belonged at this level. That her shot was real. That her game had value independent of any system or any superstar. And when Clark went down and the easy shots dried up and defenses tightened and everything got hard again, Hull reached back for that belief. And it held. She kept shooting, kept competing, kept showing up with the same energy every single night even when the results weren't as clean and the crowd wasn't as electric and the cameras weren't pointed in her direction. And that right there? That is the real Caitlin Clark effect on Lexi Hull. Not the stats. Not the open threes. Not the sold-out arenas. The belief. But here's what I haven't told you yet. Because while all of this internal growth was happening, while Hull was quietly becoming one of the most reliable shooters in the WNBA, the outside world was starting to notice. And when the outside world notices, everything gets complicated again. Alright guys, let's talk about what happens when the world finally starts paying attention. Because up until 2024, Lexi Hull was essentially invisible to the casual sports fan. And I don't mean that as a dig, I mean it literally. You could walk up to 100 basketball fans on the street and maybe 3 of them could tell you who she was. That's just the reality of playing on a struggling WNBA franchise before the Clark era. The coverage wasn't there. The eyeballs weren't there. The cultural moment hadn't arrived yet. But then 2024 happened. And everything changed. And I'm not just talking about the basketball either. I'm talking about the full package of what sudden visibility actually looks like when it hits you all at once. Lexi Hull went from background player to Glamour magazine's Women of the Year. Let that sink in for a second. Glamour magazine. Women of the Year. Sitting alongside some of the most recognized names in entertainment, fashion, business, and sports. For a player who 2 years earlier was lying awake wondering if she'd make the next day's roster. That's a plot twist that would seem unrealistic in a movie script. And it wasn't just glamour. The TikTok presence exploded. The social media following jumped. Brand opportunities started appearing. Media requests started rolling in. Suddenly everybody wanted a piece of Lexi Hull, the breakout story of the Indiana Fever's historic season. The sharpshooter who found her confidence in the shadow of the biggest star women's basketball had ever seen. But here's what nobody tells you about sudden visibility, bro. It comes with noise. A lot of noise. See, when you go from invisible to visible overnight, people form opinions fast. And not everybody's opinion is kind. Not everybody's take is fair. And definitely not everybody's narrative is accurate. Because alongside all the genuine love and recognition Hull was receiving, there was another conversation happening. A quieter one. A nastier one. The kind that lives in comment sections and anonymous posts and hot takes from people who never watched a single Indiana Fever game before Clark arrived. The narrative was simple and reductive and honestly kind of disrespectful when you examine it closely. Lexi Hull is only good because of Caitlin Clark. There it is. That's the take. That's what was circulating. That all of Hull's growth, all of her improved shooting, all of her confidence and production, it wasn't real. It was borrowed. It was a byproduct of standing next to greatness and catching the overflow. And you know what's maddening about that take, guys? It ignores everything. It ignores the 2 years of grinding through fear on a losing team that would have broken most players mentally. It ignores the work she was putting in behind the scenes, in the gym before anyone arrived and after everyone left. It ignores the Stanford Foundation and the elite competitive experience she brought into the league from day one. It ignores the fact that plenty of players have played alongside generational talents and never broke out the way Hull did, because talent and work ethic still matter even when you have great teammates. But here's the thing about unfair narratives. They get inside your head whether you want them to or not. And Hull had to face that. Had to look at those takes and decide what she was going to do with them. Was she going to shrink back into the scared player who needed every shot to go in just to feel safe? Or was she going to stand on everything she had built and let the basketball speak for itself? The answer she chose is exactly what you'd expect from someone who had already survived the hardest version of this mental battle. She chose to be unbothered. Not performatively unbothered. Not the fake, I don't read comments thing that celebrities say while absolutely reading every comment. Genuinely, fundamentally unbothered. Because she had already done the internal work. She already knew who she was as a player. She already had the receipts, the film, the percentages, the clutch moments, the games where Clark was sidelined and she still delivered. The haters didn't have new information. They just had loud voices. And loud voices can't take away what you've already built inside yourself. But guys, just when Hull had found her footing publicly, just when the outside noise started to fade and the real story of her growth was starting to get the recognition it deserved, something happened that nobody in the WNBA world was fully prepared for. Something that would test not just Hull's confidence, but the entire Indiana Fever franchise. Okay guys, we need to talk about the thing that was sitting underneath all of this the entire time. Because everything we've covered so far, the fear, the transformation, the Clark effect, the outside noise, all of it was happening inside a much bigger context. A context that the casual fan glosses over but that every single player inside that Indiana Fever locker room was living with every single day. The pressure of expectations. And not just normal professional sports expectations. Not the regular, we want to win games and make the playoffs kind of pressure. I'm talking about the suffocating, unprecedented, historically unique pressure that comes with being the most watched, most scrutinized, most commercially valuable team in the history of women's basketball. Because that's what the Indiana Fever became the moment Caitlin Clark put on that jersey. The entire sports world, and I mean the entire sports world, not just WNBA fans, was watching. ESPN was watching. Sports talk radio was watching. Casual fans who had never seen a single WNBA game in their lives were suddenly tuning in every night. The ratings were historic. The attendance was historic. The merchandise sales were historic. And with all of that came something that nobody in that organization had ever had to manage before. The weight of being a symbol. See, the Indiana Fever in 2024 weren't just a basketball team trying to win games. They were a cultural moment. They were the proof of concept for an entire argument about whether women's sports could sustain mainstream attention at the highest level. Every game they played carried that weight. Every win validated the movement. Every loss got dissected and debated and weaponized by people with agendas on both sides of the conversation. For Lexi Hull, sitting right in the middle of all of that, the mental challenge had evolved into something completely different from those early years of fear and doubt. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about significance. Because Hull wasn't just playing for her roster spot now. She wasn't just playing to prove she belonged. She was playing as part of something that millions of people were emotionally invested in. And that kind of significance, that kind of meaning attached to your work, it's beautiful and it's terrifying in equal measure. She talked about this in a way that genuinely floored me, guys. Said that there were moments in that 2024 season where she'd look around during warm-ups, see the packed arena, hear the noise, feel the energy of a crowd that was there, genuinely there, not just filling seats, and feel this overwhelming sense of responsibility. Not to perform, not to hit shots, but to honor the moment. To be worthy of what women's basketball had built to get to this point. And that is a heavy thing to carry, bro. That is a weight that goes way beyond basketball. Because now you're not just a player. You're a participant in a movement. Every time you step on that floor, you're representing something bigger than any individual game or individual season. And here's where it gets really interesting, guys. Because that shift from survival to significance didn't just affect how Hull played. It affected how she communicated, how she showed up publicly, how she talked about the game and her teammates and her own journey. She became more open, more vocal, more willing to share the vulnerable stuff. The fear, the doubt, the mental battle, because she understood that her story wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every young player watching. Every girl in a rec league somewhere dreaming about playing professionally. Every athlete at any level who had ever been consumed by performance anxiety and wondered whether they were cut out for the pressure. Lexi Hull's story, the real one, not the highlight reel version, was proof that the fear doesn't have to win. But here's what's wild, guys. Just when Hull had found this perfect balance, this beautiful intersection of personal growth and collective purpose, the 2024 season delivered one final gut punch that nobody saw coming. And it came from the most unexpected direction possible. Alright guys, we're almost at the finish line. And I need you locked in for this one because this part of the story is the one that ties everything together. So picture this. The 2024 WNBA season is winding down. The Indiana Fever have exceeded every expectation. The crowds are electric. The ratings are through the roof. Caitlin Clark has just been named Rookie of the Year in the most dominant debut performance women's basketball has ever seen. Lexi Hull is shooting lights out, getting national recognition, appearing in major publications, finding her voice publicly in ways she never had before. On the surface, everything looks perfect. But underneath the surface, inside the locker room, inside the competitive reality of a league that doesn't stop moving for anybody, there was a tension building that nobody outside that building fully understood. Because here's the thing about being on a team that the whole world is watching. The whole world forms opinions. About your coach. About your roster construction. About who deserves more minutes and who deserves less. About whether the team around Clark is good enough to actually compete for a championship. About whether the pieces fit. And some of those opinions, even the ones coming from a genuine place of wanting the Fever to succeed, were pointed directly at players like Lexi Hull. Could she do it on a bigger stage? Could she perform when the games truly mattered? When the pressure was playoff level, championship level, everything on the line level? Because shooting 47% from 3 in the regular season is impressive. Genuinely impressive. But the WNBA playoffs are a completely different animal, bro. Defenses tighten. Schemes adjust. Every single possession gets magnified. The mental game becomes as important as the physical one, maybe more important. And for a player who had spent 2 years paralyzed by performance anxiety on a losing team with nothing at stake, the question of how she'd respond when everything was at stake was completely legitimate. Hull knew people were asking it. She felt it. And then the playoffs came. And Lexi Hull showed up. Not perfectly. Not without moments of struggle and adjustment and the inevitable learning curve that comes with high-stakes postseason basketball. But she showed up with the same energy, the same commitment, the same willingness to take and make the big shots that had defined her entire 2024 transformation. There was this one moment, and I wish I could bottle this moment and hand it to every athlete who has ever been consumed by fear, where Hull caught a pass on the wing in a crucial playoff situation. Defender closing out. Game on the line. The old Lexi Hull, the one from 2022, the one playing scared, would have hesitated. Would have pump-faked, driven into trouble, given it back up, done anything to avoid the responsibility of that shot. This Lexi Hull caught it, set her feet, let it fly, and it went in. And in that moment, that single frozen moment between the catch and the release, you could see everything we've been talking about for the last 8 parts of this story. The fear she had conquered. The belief Clark had helped install in her. The work she had put in when nobody was watching. The growth that the haters said wasn't real. All of it, right there, in one shot. But here's what really got me, guys. What really elevated this whole story from a sports narrative to something genuinely human and genuinely important. After the game, after the cameras found her and the reporters wanted their sound bites and the social media clips were already being cut, Hull didn't talk about the shot. Didn't hype herself up. Didn't clap back at the critics who had spent months suggesting she was just a product of Clark's gravity. She talked about the journey. She talked about what it felt like to come from that dark place of fear and doubt and near invisibility. She talked about what it meant to have a teammate who genuinely believed in her before she fully believed in herself. She talked about the responsibility she felt to be honest about the mental side of the game, because too many athletes suffer in silence, and she didn't want her story to be one more example of a professional athlete pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. She said the growth was real. The work was real. The transformation was real. And guys, after everything we've unpacked in this video, I don't think anyone can argue with that. But there's one final piece to this story. One final truth that Lexi Hull has spoken about that reframes the entire narrative around her, around Clark, around this Indiana Fever team and what they represent for the future of women's basketball. And it's the piece that honestly, genuinely, I didn't see coming. Alright guys, final part. And I need you to hear this one all the way through because this is where everything lands. We've been on a journey together in this video. And I don't use that word lightly. Because what Lexi Hull's story actually is, when you strip away the stats and the highlights and the magazine covers and the viral moments, is a masterclass in what it takes to survive and thrive when the world around you changes faster than you can process it. And the final truth that Hull has spoken about publicly, the thing that reframes everything, is this. She doesn't credit Caitlin Clark for her success. Now before you close the tab, before you think I'm about to take some contrarian hot take angle, hear me out. Because this isn't about diminishing what Clark meant to her journey. Hull has been abundantly, genuinely, beautifully clear about how much Clark's presence impacted her game and her confidence and her growth. But what Hull has said, and this is the part that hits different when you really absorb it, is that Clark didn't give her anything she didn't already have. Clark revealed it. There's a massive difference between those two things, bro. A massive difference. Because if Clark gave Hull her confidence, if the open shots and the gravity and the star power were the source of Hull's transformation, then the haters would be right. Then the "she's only good because of Clark" narrative would hold weight. Then everything Hull built would be fragile, dependent, temporary. But if Clark simply created the conditions for something that was already inside Hull to finally surface? If the fear was always the obstacle and Clark's presence was the catalyst that removed it? Then everything Hull has becomes hers. Fully and completely and permanently hers. And that distinction, that subtle but profound distinction, is what Lexi Hull has been trying to communicate every time she opens up about this journey. She said she had done the work. All of it. The years at Stanford. The grinding through losing seasons. The hours in the gym when nobody was watching and nobody cared about the Indiana fever and there were no cameras and no glamour magazines and no viral TikToks. She had been building something the entire time. She just needed the environment to finally let it breathe. And guys, I want you to sit with that for a second because it applies way beyond basketball. How many people are out there right now with real talent, real capability, real potential, suffocating under the wrong environment, playing scared because the system around them doesn't create space for them to be who they actually are? Holding back because the fear of failure in a high-stakes, low-support situation has rewired their confidence from the inside out? Lexi Hull's story isn't just a WNBA story. It's a human story. It's about what happens when fear gets to run the show for too long. And it's about what becomes possible when that fear finally gets challenged. Whether by a new teammate, a new environment, a new opportunity, or just a new way of thinking about your own worth. Now let me bring it home with the big picture, guys. Because this story, Hull's story, Clark's story, the Indiana Fever story, it's also about something happening in women's sports right now that is genuinely historic. The WNBA is at an inflection point. The kind of inflection point that only comes around once in a generation. The kind where casual fans become diehard fans. Where diehard fans become evangelists. Where the cultural conversation shifts permanently and you can never go back to the way things were before. Caitlin Clark didn't just change the Indiana Fever. She didn't just change the WNBA. She changed the conversation around what women's sports can be commercially, culturally, and competitively at the highest level. And that conversation, once started, doesn't stop. But here's what I want you to take away from Lexi Hull's piece of this story specifically. The superstars get the headlines. They always will. That's just how sports works and that's fine. Clark deserves every single headline she gets. The talent is real, the impact is real, the legacy is already being written in real time. But the Lexi Hulls of the world? The players grinding in the shadows, fighting through fear, doing the work when nobody is watching, waiting for the environment that finally lets them be who they always were? Those are the stories that tell you what a team is actually made of. Those are the stories that tell you whether a movement has real depth or just surface-level star power. And the fact that Indiana has both? The transcendent superstar and the players whose genuine growth proves that what's happening there is real and sustainable and built on something solid? That's why this Fever team is different. That's why this moment in women's basketball is different. That's why Lexi Hull finally speaking her truth matters way beyond one player's personal journey. She is the proof that the Caitlin Clark effect isn't just a marketing phenomenon. It's real. It's deep. And it's just getting started. So the next time somebody tells you Lexi Hull is just a product of playing next to Clark, you send them this video. You let them sit with the full story. The fear. The grind. The 2 years of survival mode on a losing team. The mental battle. The work. The transformation. The playoffs. The truth. And then you ask them, does that sound like somebody who got lucky standing next to a superstar? Or does that sound like somebody who was always built for this moment and just needed the world to finally get out of the way? I know my answer. Drop yours in the comments right now. Tell me, did Hull earn this? Is her story inspiring to you? And are you riding with the Indiana Fever this coming season? Because after everything we just broke down together, I am locked in. Don't forget to smash that like button if this video hit different. Subscribe if you're new because we go this deep on every story. And share this one, guys, because Lexi Hull's truth deserves to be heard. This has been your boy, and we out.